Hi, welcome to Intimate Discourse. My name is Jason. This episode, the Vanity Exhibitions, was recorded on May 1st, 2022 in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Thanks a lot for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, welcome to Intimate Discourse. This is Jason, and I'm here with Dimitri.
Hello.
Today we're going to be taking you through a journey on virtue signaling. What it is, what it's good for, is there any benefit to it, how has this evolved in our society, and what can we do about it, or do we need to do anything about it? Just for the uninitiated, quick sort of summation of what virtue signaling is. This is not a standard definition, but I would categorize it as something that it's something that somebody does in order to indicate an advocation for one side or another of an issue, with the main purpose of sort of advertising that position to the world, regardless of whether they're even that interested in the issue in the first place. You've obviously seen this before, and I think most people who are listening to this have, know what I'm talking about. There's all kinds of ways one can virtue signal, and we see it more and more in today's society. Everyone's doing it. Your friends, your family, corporations are certainly doing it. The places you work at, even government, who are probably the original virtue signaler. I think one thing that we want to explore today is, one of the main things that we want to sort of distinguish is where the line is between somebody genuinely supporting something, like an idea or a movement or a cause, or when they are sort of advertising this position only to receive adulation or some sort of. I really wonder why people do it sometimes. But I assume it's to receive adulation from those around them, or in many ways to feel part of a clique, and to make themselves feel important. So those are the sort of things we're going to be exploring today. But I think that's a crucial thing because there used to be genuine, people would genuinely take a side. People would, support, like protest the war in Vietnam, for example. There's probably some virtue signaling at some point in some areas there, but it's just been magnified by, technology for the most part over the last few decades. And now it's just hit this sort of monstrous proportions. Would you say, Dimitri, that's sort of a good, am I describing that right? Virtue signaling? Like,
Yeah.
is there something? My
interpretation. You made a great point too, but back in the past where people, we certainly still have protests in real life today, but protests today are in conjunction with a much louder, perhaps virtual virtue signaling. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the 1960s in Vietnam, 1970s, it was much more of a real feet on the ground protest and some skin in the game. Like you were willing to go out there and show your face and protest and perhaps take some backlash from, let's say, police officers or the authorities or whatever, because you truly believed that this is what you wanted to see changed in the world. And you were willing to risk something of your own, whether it's your own reputation, your own bodily harm, because you were the underdog. You were the small versus the mighty, in a sense. Mm-hmm. Whereas today, I think it's shifted a lot to, I actually don't care to, I like my conveniences and I don't care to have any skin in the game, but I want all the benefits
right
of being virtuous.
Yeah.
Without actually working for it, risking for it. And it takes the nobility out of the actual experience. Yeah,
that's a good way to put it. Because, there was a sort of nobility in protesting, and I guess there still is to some extent, because we should the one thing I wanted to make sure we did in this episode is I don't want to, like, I think it's important that people, stand up for what they believe in and protest and, exercise their right to disagree with policies that are coming out, and even to say to somebody on the street, like, hey, I don't agree with that, whatever,
Absolutely.
in a
Yep.
polite way. But you want to, distinguish that from people who are just, it's just so prevalent now. Like, you can't, and I think it takes on many different forms. Like, you get the thing where you have people, like I said, like putting the Ukrainian flag on their Twitter, and you start thinking, well, that's not necessarily in itself a bad thing, but that is sort of an example of what you're talking about, where there's not a lot of you're not investing much of yourself into that. It's just easy to do.
I remember a stat from 25, 30 years ago that said something to the effect of, in America, 74% of Americans couldn't find Germany on a world map.
Right,
So
right.
imagine not being able to find Germany on a world map and having an opinion on World War II.
Right.
And now today, it's like Ukraine, and then half the little icons you see have like the colors in verse instead of the blue on top and yellow below. Let's say, or yellow. They don't know which is even right side up or
Right.
right side down. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like they spend more time. I want to I want to not launch just right into ranting, but yeah, I do feel like they spend more time trying to tweak their, Twitter bio, or trying to get the right sort of combination of things to advocate, than they do taking the time to even understand what's happening.
The problem is that this virtual virtue signaling can have real world benefits to the individual seeking it, not necessarily the people that are actually receiving their virtue, let's
Right.
say.
Yeah.
So, maybe they've applied for a job, and the employer's like, well, let me check out this person's social media profile before I even entertain. Oh, look, they're into all the newest trends that we need to. Oh, this is our kind of person.
Right.
We as a company will also look now more virtuous because we're hiring these people who basically advertise their virtue to the world at large. In their off time. You're going to be making us as a corporation look good even when you're at home. Excellent.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a nice marketing. It really seems a lot like marketing. It's like the individual is marketing themselves as, look, I'm on the right side of all these things.
But
Look at the little vaccine symbols.
Completely self-serving.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Because
The
it's,
complete antithesis of what the virtue that you're trying to signal is supposed to indicate.
of course.
I stand with. No, you don't. You
Yeah.
don't even know where this place is on the map. You probably have never, I don't know, met a person in that world, dated somebody from that part of the world, thought about what religion they are, what currency do they use, how many flights travel there daily, what are monuments do they have. You don't know anything. But all of a sudden now you're proclaiming it as if you're the front of 10,000 people coming down the street, and you're the one holding the flag the highest. Most proudly,
Yeah.
this is my rally that I wish to, show the world that I am the champion of these peoples, because you put a little 380 by 480 pixel on top of your Facebook page.
it reminds me of high school or like college, where it's like you get the just people almost like advertising their clicks. Like, so we have a mutual friend. I'll tell you after who it is because I don't want to embarrass him. But like, I remember it was like 5 or 6 years ago. He posted, this is when I was still, going on Facebook, but he posted a picture of himself with a leather jacket on, and, real kind of tough looking or whatever, and had a big circle that said racism, homophobia, and it was like sexism or something. And then had a big cross, like X through it or whatever, like no of those, and like posting it as if it was like groundbreaking or something. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, man, like obviously, like, it's like we broke those barriers decades ago. And still residual effects or whatever, but this is not like some brave, position you're taking. So like I have a problem, I guess, with people who are like this is all for you. Like, don't pretend that you're advancing some movement here. Like, the war in that front has already been won in the public opinion. Like, everybody knows that stuff's bad. Like, I'll tell you who it is after, but
you're right. That's true. It's all for them. So what would be the antithesis? Like, what is not for that person? And would that be real virtue then?
the antithesis of
So like coming out for gay rights in the late 1950s per se. Like those are the rebels.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
You know.
So yeah, and you start to think, and just before I want to wrap up, because I forgot to sort of like bring that home, but like this is the same person would wear skinny puppy jackets, but he didn't like skinny puppy, but he just liked the jacket. He thought the jackets looked cool, and then it was
that's
like
a trend these days. You know that, eh?
What
like
is
Instagram guys and girls wearing T-shirts of rock bands that they have no idea.
Oh, really? Yeah.
But it's a cool symbol. And
Yeah. It's like when I see
that
Joy Division Closer one, I'm always cringing because I'm like, oh, you don't listen to Joy Division.
Is it that Burning Man, the festival they have out like in the desert somewhere in the States, and it's quite visual, but everyone there dresses up and it looks like Mad Max, and it's like a concert, like rave.
Yeah.
But it's very Instagrammable, where people literally just go to take their shots and up their points, and come home. And the T-shirts are very much part of that type of culture.
Yeah.
Which again, if they were authentic and they were like listening to, I don't know, like I used to listen, I'm sure you did too when you were younger, like Depeche Mode, and Martin Gore would wear black nail polish in 1984, and we were the kids in the halls of this high school defending them.
Right, yeah, no, for sure.
Like, are you kidding me? Like, I've been there way before you guys. I was the guy on my own where everybody's like, no, man, there's no drummer in the band. They ain't cool.
Right,
and you're like, no, they can be.
Yeah.
And now it just becomes like, look at me, I'm wearing this shirt. Aren't I so like open-minded?
Yeah. No, it's easy to be open-minded now. Like that's, in fact, it's almost like being closed-minded would be the trend, the kind of like
closed-minded to their fake open-mindedness.
Yeah,
you can just call them out. Go, this is just not real. You don't believe it. It's all just superficial, and you're a couple decades late to the game.
Yeah. And I mean, not to belabor the parallel between like liking certain music or whatever, but I that is true. Like where we grew up and where we I guess in our sort of formative years or whatever, and in university, it was like we would sort of seamlessly hang out with people who were gay or were cross-dressers, or there seemed to be a lot in the cliques that we sort of associated with, and it was never a thing like where we felt like we had to advocate for anybody. They're all just people that we associated with, and it was just like I don't know. It was almost like something happened in the decades that followed, where it became like I don't know. Like there was a progression upward, where like in my mind in those days, everybody was sort of like, I know this sounds very easy to say now or whatever, but it was like everybody was equal. Like there was no like, I mean, there might have been some like joking around or whatever, but like everybody I think was sort of all on the same team. Like, and it never occurred to anybody. There's no real bigots. Like I didn't really know anybody who was like actually bigoted. Yep. And that was in like, the 90s. So it's like, so you would assume that the progression would be up, and it's like, now it's all of a sudden we're dealing with, like you would think if you were an alien coming down here that like, we just had race wars or something, like with all the...
Well, a club is a good metaphor, because a club you were bringing together, let's say back in the day, especially one of the smaller, nichier type of scene, musically, you're bringing like-minded people together. But like-minded could be like, you had the biker, you had the skinny puppy person, you had the trans cross-dresser, and it didn't matter because the commonality was you were there for the underground music scene.
Yeah.
And you saw unity in that.
Yeah.
Whereas today we only see division amongst all these different groups.
It's a good point.
Yeah, the box, in a sense, was for the island of misfit toys, and in that we rejoiced in just being equal.
Right.
It was maybe, in a sense, one place you could just totally let loose. Dancing music is very like vibration, spiritual sort of, and you just you be you, man, no problem.
Yeah.
And then now somehow we've taken that unity, and like you said, if someone were to come down to the world today, like, man, you guys got to get along because you're all like tearing each other apart.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like it wasn't unspoken about and we just didn't know about it. I've never seen in my lifetime, I've never seen a person like at work be put down or not get hired because of their gender or color. And I've worked in places perhaps that are a little more progressive because they're in the beauty industry and whatnot. So you do tend to, kind of like our clubs, you do bring in our music clubs, a more eclectic set of people. But I haven't bumped into it. And a lot of people I talk to haven't really bumped into it. Not to say it doesn't exist, but I'm just not sure it's the impenetrable wall it's portrayed as.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I want to be careful because I hear myself talking and I think to myself like, this is, I can just hear somebody, echoing, saying back to me like, whoa, that's what you would think being a straight white male. But like, we both sort of went, like, in my industry is different than yours, and I've never seen that kind of thing either. Like, I've never seen people being held back. I've been on the point of like, being able to hire somebody, and it's never even occurred to me. I've just never seen it in practice. And it's not to say that it hasn't happened. Maybe that's the whole point.
But if it was so prevalent, the average person should have seen it a couple times in their lifetime. And when you talk to the average person, for the most part, when I talk to them, and what I've amongst people, everybody who I talk to, fortunately, it seems quite rare.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we're in Toronto. Maybe it's something that happens more in the States or in less progressive cities. But it's not. And, this does, like, it's not to say, of course, like the disclaimer that, racism, sexism, all that stuff doesn't happen. It's just that the level to which it's being fought against seems to be something that would be more appropriate in, like, the Civil War area or something, where it's
how about different countries in 2022 other than those
right, yeah, or right? A lot of other countries that are around now, yeah.
It's like we got 90% on the test. What happened to the other 10%?
yeah. Meanwhile, you've countries failing. You know what I mean, all over the place.
Yeah. And they just sit there and they point out the 10% of your error. Mm-hmm. Not acknowledging the 90% and 90% of the correctness, and then also that you're probably in the top 10% of all the countries in the world anyways by such behavior.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. So that's where we're bringing it back to virtue. It does seem to be like a hollow drum they're beating. It doesn't really resonate. I don't see too much substance in just like virtue signaling.
Yeah.
I love my rebels. I love my misfits. I love people who are the outliers of a distribution curve.
Yeah.
By the very definition, they're the more interesting people because they're more rare.
Yeah. You wonder to what extent it's, I think of the 60s sort of civil rights movements as like, there was a big discrepancy. Like there needed to be real change. So it's like they put the foot on the metal and they accelerated but now we're kind of at almost like cruising altitude. And I think it's almost like things will eventually gravitate toward a norm if we just sort of I think there's enough momentum now, is what I'm saying, for the final barriers to be broken.
I've heard it explained too, like in evolutionary terms. Like, for instance, hunter-gatherers, when you'd go and collect berries, and you're looking at the way the human mind looks at things, it's like you grab the biggest and freshest berries first, because they're the ones that are right in front of your eyes and they're obvious. This is what I need to eat. Let's go for it. But and those would be the metaphors, or those would be the initial problems you would see in society in the 60s. What are the most obvious problems? Let's tackle them. But then as you start to clear out those things and you get your successes and equality and everything, you start looking for more berries, but there can only be so many big berries. And so then your eye finally tunes on for the smaller berries. And then you get those and you look for even more problems or more berries.
Right.
And so what's happening is that the progression is creating, I think, almost this evolutionary pressure where we're looking for problems where they're certainly not critical to the functioning of society, and it's ever diminishing returns for the amount of effort we're putting into them.
Right.
And that can tear you apart. You start splitting hairs, sort of thing.
Yeah, and in many ways, you, instead of looking at the major problems of the world, which would be totalitarian regimes, arming, nuclear proliferation, environment. Like, there's a lot of problems that we have. It's almost like these people got their social science degrees and set about justifying their education by creating or amplifying problems where they didn't necessarily exist. It's like like you said, there's no more big berries to pick, but they have to somehow make a living. So it's like, let's start like making up berries.
Yeah,
that's a good analogy.
You're actually then making virtual berries. There are no more berries left to pick, but we shall invent some.
Yeah.
The invisible dots between points. Yeah.
So, how do you think things got this way? Like, where was the point? Like, I think of like I started to clue into, like, I don't know, this is sort of the line between virtue signaling and genuine support for a cause, I think, is sometimes blurry. Like, I remember during the Iraq War, like, a lot of people were against the Iraq War, and I remember cities flaring up in protest at the beginning of it, like across the United States, like the first Iraq War. Or was it the second one? It was the second one where the protests started flaring up. I just remember that I support the troops, or we support
Yeah.
the troops, that bumper sticker, like everybody would get it. And
There
I still
was
see it, but
yellow flowers. I think they were putting on their mailboxes to show everybody as well.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, some sort. It was, and at the time I thought, what a nice gesture.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
simple.
yeah.
It was fresh. It was and kind of invigorating. Like, oh, that's such a kind thing.
Well, if you're actually going to people's mailboxes, I mean, at least you're doing something about it.
Or I
you know,
think the
it's not-
people that lived in the houses were putting them out in their mailbox to show we support our troops. That was a nice.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
okay,
like
yeah.
yes, I am with you, sort of thing.
But
It felt genuine, fresh, and new.
But I also thought that the whole "I support our troops," like it just seems like a very, you know what? It seems like propaganda. Like it seems like it's like, what does that, what does that mean?
Well, you could be using people's virtue to achieve a political end.
Of course,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you're like, basically, so they invade Iraq, and then it's like, you want to get the populace behind it. So it's like, well, you can't say like, I support the war, or I support the,
So
the Bush administration.
You put a benign flower.
Yeah, you have to support the troops,
You're gonna
right? Like,
diss
what
the
do you?
flower?
Yeah, well, and it came from the backlash. I think there was a lot of like, I know when Vietnam vets came back, there was like a lot of backlash against, because the war was so unpopular. Somehow that translated into the vets being, it's like they still went, they still fought. You know what I mean? It's not their fault. But I think that people were really aware of that in the Iraq War, so it was almost like this whole idea of like, let's put out this "I support the troops," trope, and
Get ahead of the story.
yeah, get ahead of the story. And then it's like people are going to be, they know you can't say a bad thing about that. But really, when you think of that, what does that mean? Do you financially support the troops? Do you just emotionally support them? Like, do you support? You don't want them to
Both,
die?
The
Like,
majority of it was having the population behind whatever the government wanted it. The
Yeah,
story
yeah,
of
yeah.
the day. That's what really interests the government.
right, right.
And you're right. Like here, you're putting a flower out to say, I support this first world nation with the largest military ever put together to go bomb one of the poorest places on earth.
Right,
And
right.
by that, I'm going to put a flower outside my house.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know?
It's something. I mean, well, you think of now the Russian people are very supportive of the war, right? So the war in the Ukraine. So it's like, and we see that and we're like, well, that's crazy. Why would anybody like? Why would are they so brainwashed or whatever? But it's like, well, what were we doing? Like.
True. And I'm not Ukrainian nor Russian, and I don't know too many. I know some, but not too many of those peoples here in Canada to get into the problem is that these are complex geopolitical issues that have a lot of nuance and a lot of muddy history, and certainly for me, a war, just by the fact that it starts, is a failure. It's a failure
Yeah.
from previous negotiations and everything else. War is failure. But I can see a Russian person's point of view. I may not accept it, but I can see when they would say, well, as an American, you didn't like missiles in Cuba and you supported, John F. Kennedy
Yeah.
bombing Cuba. So that's what we're doing with Ukraine. And they have, to a degree, a point.
Yeah.
So now, if you have state-controlled media in Russia and they don't get the full story, that's what happens.
Yeah,
You
for
get
sure.
People behind you. That's their version of the flower.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, and then the Iraq War was the whole, weapons of mass destruction, axis of evil. So there's a reason. Yeah, I agree, and I think most people would agree. Like, just war is horrible. But it's it comes back to. It's like the governments of the world. I don't know if this is conscious or whatever, or if it's an actual. They do have a propaganda arm that kind of does this, but like it's like they like to prep the populace for these things. So like, with the I support the troops. It's like, it's just an easy way for the government to kind of get people behind the war, because you can't go against that. And it's sort of. It's almost sad to see whole populations fall victim to a kind of virtue signaling, where it's this like dumbed down version of a complex issue, and then sold to us to then sort of, so we have a side to cheer on.
Yeah. It's it works over and over again.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it does lend into the topics of the day of like mass psychosis, mass formation and whatnot, where you have free floating anxiety. What is this war? Who's dying? I don't know. Are they going to attack us? Well, the solution is, and then you're provided a single solution.
Right,
We
right,
will put the flower in front of our house and we will put the sticker on our Facebook, and our
right.
government will go there and do the single right thing. And we will end this.
Yeah, yeah.
And it just, you repeat. And as long as you don't have much narrative out there, like for like nuance in the discussion to break and fragment society into different points of view over it, people will coalesce around the one provided answer and get behind it.
Right.
It's very tribal.
I remember when Bush was running for re-election, and I would talk to, there was this one friend of mine who's American, and she's very smart, and she was going to vote for Bush, and I'm like, and she's like, well, we're in the middle of a war. You can't change presidents in the middle of the war. You don't want to do it. I'm like, yeah, but he started the war. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
therefore the war will never end.
Yeah, like,
obviously.
Yeah, it's amazing how, and it's the same thing with the vaccines and everything like that. But it's like, otherwise really intelligent people, sort of fall for this and are victims to this. Whatever you want to call it, like mass psychosis or whatever. Yeah.
Formation. Yeah. Yep. That's how it definitely goes. And again, in that case, her single solution was the president, and we're not switching the president because he's a solution to the problem we have at hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it probably works. There's probably evolutionary processes that make this sort of work, but it's being manipulated, and the governments and the corporations are very smart about how they use this. And it is kind of like hacking your brain. Because now it bypasses, like you said, your intelligence and hits you on a sort of really cerebral, primal level that you just like, oh no, this is my tribe and I got to do everything to protect my tribe.
Yeah.
Whatever that may be. And you may not want to admit that it's evil because it'll be presented in a nice yellow flower that's put in front of your house. But you're protecting your tribe because you're scared. Yeah.
Right, right.
So yeah, bringing it back to virtue signaling and stuff, all these things we're talking about are the real tangible things, but today so much of it is just it reminds me somewhere in my back of my head, it reminds me of what it must have been like 200 years ago when everybody went to church on Sunday simply because they were afraid in their small little towns other people would notice they didn't go to church.
Right, yeah.
And are you going for altruistic reasons? Do you enjoy? Are you getting anything out of it? Or are you better off just not going and pretending that and showing your truth that you don't really care about this?
Yeah.
So there's something in us as humans that we are constantly signaling.
As humans, we sort of huddle together and we want to be, I just think of us, or, our ancestors in caves, like huddling together, like terrified of the dark, terrified of going outside. And, I think that we've evolved this, this kind of need to belong to a tribe. So, and I think that's a big part of this is like, people, and because there aren't as many institutions anymore, like, a lot of people live in cities, so it's just this big sprawling area, or, there's not really churches, like even people's families are fairly disparate at this point. Like there's a lot of different elements to it, and it's not quite as cohesive as maybe it used to be on average. But and so I think there's this kind of like almost yearning to belong to something, and this can play out. This might be one of the things that kind of feeds into this, where, if you want to belong again now, you can identify as somebody who is, somebody who is against racism, or against like there's solutions that are offered to you. You just have to say that you want to belong to the group, and then if you advertise that you belong to the group, you're part of that group. And of course, every one of these movements sort of needs an enemy, or a Lex Luthor to go against. So it's you have that double satisfaction of belonging to the group and feeling belonged, and you're also like can point your fingers at somebody else and say you're the bad ones.
Automatic acceptance. There's no gatekeeper. Can you come to the group or not? I'm in. You're
Right.
accepted right away. And if it's the predominant view in the geographic area, then all of a sudden you're on the winning team.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, well, of course. And you're right. When you're living in a larger city where you're anonymous most of the time, this would create a sense of connection.
Yeah.
That you just, as you're walking, down the streets where nobody knows your name, you feel a sense of connection because you're getting likes and tweets on something you posted in a virtual reality.
Yeah. Which is, I wonder, I mean, it must be a more hollow feeling now because you don't have the same, like, because a lot of it is made easier by technology. Like, there's not the same investment of your time, but it's also, when you think of the old days and like everybody sort of belonged to, I don't want to say it, like a church or like just a community or whatever, you would have these kinds of the same debates we're having now online where people are tearing each other's throats out over the smallest of things. They used to have these kinds of debates amongst themselves, like in, communities or even your work colleagues at the water cooler, wherever. But these are people that you already know and you have a mutual respect for. So like, you're not going to start like, there's almost a, predisposition to kind of assume that they're like, well, I know they're not crazy, so I'll just listen to them and hear them out. And then it's more conducive to like a compromise kind of chat.
The virtual way of chatting is horrific.
Right.
We haven't, you're right. All the underlying, like for instance, I'm standing in front of you now. And if we were disagreeing on something tremendously, at the end of the day, you do want the other person. There's something about us as humans that you do want the other person to appreciate you, like you, be reciprocal in their tone towards you. There's just something inherently human about that, how we communicate, and that entire layer of that gets wiped out by talking online.
Yeah.
Right. So, unfortunately, if you think of it this way, the majority of communication today is happening virtually. And it's the worst form of communication we've ever really devised in terms of actually being able to suss out a nuanced conversation.
Yeah.
So having the most conversation in the worst forums, which brings me back to, that's why I'm such a fan of the way, and it would just happen by fluke, but how Europe, which most of it was, put together before the car was invented, each town has its town square. And a town square gives you a rallying point where you can be like, today at 6 p.m. at Sunday, we're going to be talking about this sort of thing.
Right.
And around the square, you have your assortment of cafes and bakeries and things that you're going to need to be somewhere for 3-4 hours. Yeah. So now you can and you see the people. And it's very similar, I would think, to what it would be like saying, well, why go to a live music concert when you can just get the DVD and sit at home in the comfort of your sofa? People like to be around the noise of other people. And probably even the noise of other like-minded people, right? Bringing back to like the clubs we used to. It brought everybody together despite all their differences because they were there for one common theme. And so then when you have that common theme might be, the topic of the day, but it's going to be a rally at a square, and those squares are accessible by foot from your house. That creates a radically different society. And in North America, we don't have squares in our suburbs. They might have little parkettes in downtown urban cores. And I almost wonder if it was done by design because it really then isolates us. I have a dream sometimes, like how could you possibly introduce the European town square into the geography of a suburban landscape in North America? And the only thing I can really come up with is that we do have schools, and schools have public parks. So how hard would it be then to take a portion of the public park where you have your soccer field and your baseball diamond and spend a couple $1,000s and carve out a mini podium with a couple like amphitheater like seating, and you could actually have the school come out and that's where they would do their debates and the tradition of Aristotle and Plato or whatnot.
Right.
And you could then put, like, say your kids are into some sort of they want to support a Black Lives Matter, and they can literally go around to the houses in their neighborhood and drop off flyers in the surrounding houses and say, you know what, Sunday afternoon we're having a rally at that school.
Yeah.
It's a big open grassy field. Come there, let's do this.
Or not even a rally. They could have their, that's where they're going to be talking about it, and like other people can ask questions about it, so that people, because like it's so polarizing. Like you don't know, you say like Black Lives Matter, and it's like people have such different reactions to that, and it's usually like a strong reaction, and maybe even for no reason, but it's like viscerally that we have this strong reaction to certain words.
I would be willing to bet in an organic setting like a schoolyard, a town square, you're actually going to get then people who are not particularly interested in that point of view, but they want to hear it still for themselves. And they want to see the people that support this
Yeah.
for themselves. What type of people are these people that are coming to this?
Yeah.
What do they look like? Are they there with their children and cotton candy, or do they have large beards and Confederate flags?
Right,
Like,
right.
who are these people?
Yeah.
Whereas in an online world, you can't simply tell who that person is you're chatting with.
Yeah.
And if they were sitting in front of you, you might actually find them repulsive or a wonderful human, just a completely different point of view. You will not get that from virtual signaling online or even talking online. So we got to almost like, I don't know, we almost have to regulate or just encourage a whole new layer of civil discourse that is really face to face.
Yeah, no, it sounds like an interesting idea, and you have because you would be also kind of this would be kids that were doing it, so it's like the next generation would have that. They would have done that in school, so it'd be more inclined to do it as
If you
adults.
do it in the schoolyard, like, well, we've been doing this since grade 8.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and I love that. I know how to set up. I know how to organize. I know how many people can fit here. We got the little podium.
Yeah.
Voila. All the parents come out. What's going on? What are they chatting about? I don't think I like this, but I want to see for myself. Amazing.
Yeah.
Right. And then you go back to your houses and kitchen, put on some coffee and talk about what the heck you just saw.
Yeah. Interaction. Yeah, that would be
Human interaction. Yeah.
I was just, as you were saying that, I was also thinking, like, I think a lot of it, another bad thing about the virtual interaction is you have a lot of, you say, if you go to see people in person, you get a sense of what kind of person they are, you talk to them, all this, but like online, you really don't even know if they're real people. So it's like you might have spam bots, you might have, just bots that are advocating some idea, or even if it's not bots, maybe it's somebody ostensibly portraying themselves as, for example, like a Trump supporter or a Black Lives Matter supporter, but they're actually working for the other team.
North
and it's like
Macedonian troll farms.
Right.
Oh, can you imagine like how absurd this would be? Like, imagine a presidential debate in which they didn't actually stand in the same room and talk together, but they were just chatting in some chat room and you had to follow the conversation.
Right.
You would never be able to just like understand who you wanted to vote for.
Right.
Even if it was your only two options and they were the two parties and you've always been one party. So if you can't understand that, how are you going to understand and unravel the nuances when 75 people are chatting underneath a Toronto Star article about the topic of the day?
Yeah.
You can't possibly get anything out of it.
Yeah.
But I don't think we can like turn it off. We just have to build around it.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think we can turn it off either now, because I was just trying to think of how difficult it would be to get our generation, or even most generations below us.
Below, you mean by in age?
In age, yeah. under us. That's maybe. To try to get them to just go out to a public sphere, like everybody would be really skeptical about it. Like if it was advertised as like, come on out, we're going to talk about Black Lives Matter or something.
You're just trying to convert me.
Yeah, it's like, what is this? Like, I don't have time for this or whatever. But if you get kids doing it, then it's like you start getting that, and it's it stimulates interest in both the issues and the issues that people would care about, and also in talking to other people to talk about those issues and solve those problems.
And people can set it up as single speakers from just one point of view, or they can actually have from 2 or 3 different points of view. Like, share the space,
Yeah.
Just come and listen. Shakespeare in the park, sort of idea.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was one of them, Socrates, Aristotle, is like don't spend your energy tearing down the old. Spend your energy building up the new.
Yeah.
And it's true, because you can't tear down the old. It's embedded. It's there. It's legacy. Just go around it.
Right.
Just create a whole new ecosystem of communication right around it. And people will follow if it's truly better.
I don't go out like in the park to like socialize. Like, I'm not a very social person, but every time that I do go to like, a play in the park, or like a high park, or like any, I don't know, skating or whatever, I usually have a really good time, and I usually feel stimulated. I'm like, I come back and I'm like, that was worth it. Like, that felt good. It's almost like I feel almost starved for that kind of.
It's everything we're meant to be. There's fresh air. There's human communication. You're taking a bit of a walk. You get distracted. You can look at the beautiful nature around you. You come back to the focused ideas. I'd be willing to bet you would get more out of 2 hours being in that sort of environment intellectually than you would 8 hours in front of the computer.
Right.
So
yeah.
it's also ironically more efficient.
Yeah. I think talking about the evolution of how we sort of found ourselves in this situation where virtue signaling has become so prevalent, for sure, as we've said, like has something to do with technology and how easy it is to just sort of like be a good person by just sitting on your couch and like, liking a tweet or something like that. But I think well, you hinted at it with your people cultivating their bios for potential job interviews or whatever. Like the average person didn't used to have a public image or have to worry about a public
Not at
image.
all.
Like they had to make sure they weren't,
Yep.
They didn't do anything really
Do you have a
horrible, like they didn't
criminal
murder
record?
anyone. But
Exactly.
yeah, but they never used to have to worry about things they would say to other people. Even if they drank too much or whatever, they say the wrong thing. It's like, okay, they need to patch things up with that person or whatever. But now it's just like a permanent record. So it's you have to be more careful about what you say anywhere, online or off, because offline everything is just so. There's cameras everywhere. You never know who's listening.
Or you just pull the Donald Trump, Elon Musk card and be like, I've just always been crazy.
Right.
And you're not going to be able to pull out any single tweet.
Right.
No, the whole thing is just like that. Do you like me or not?
Yeah.
Because if we do that, censorship leads to self-censoring. Because you see people getting censored, you're like, well, I don't want that to happen to me.
Yeah.
And you, in turn, self-censor. And if you don't have then that open, honest dialogue, like you said, on your online public life, let's say, where you feel comfortable, let's say is, your first and last name on Facebook, chatting underneath the Toronto Star, and you say something that perhaps lands the wrong way. You know what I mean? But like, that's your name, and you commented it publicly, that's it, you're toast.
Yeah.
You won't want to make that comment. So you can't even have this virtual conversation in any honest thing. Everybody's just picking the side that they think is going to be the predominant prevailing force in the place they live, and stick with that one thing.
Yeah. As you say that, I was like conscious of the fact that we're doing this podcast, but only giving our first names because
I pulled back there for a second.
We're authentic enough, we'll use the right names, but I don't. But you never know what's going to happen. So it's the same, just like hedging your bets a little.
But I'm not a football guy, but is it Kaepernick? That's
Yeah.
his name? And I don't know the level of quality of player he was at all. But I found I didn't follow the story tremendously, but I have something to say about it. So assuming kneeling is considered a bad thing towards anthems, because I've heard both positive and negative, it can also be done in a form of reverence, but let's just assume, because that was how the general media took it, it was a negative thing. Perhaps I'm old school, but I'm going to tie this to exactly what we're talking about, virtue signaling, because there he's showing a certain virtue that he wants to signal to everybody that he's upset about something, even though he's at work at the moment.
Right.
It's not his private life. He's in his place of occupation, in his uniform, with the people paying for them in the stands or behind them. He's at work, right? And he decides, no, I wish to now signal my personal virtue whilst at work. Okay, so you brought your personal stuff into the workplace. What do we used to say when we were growing up? Leave all your problems at home. When you come to work, it's work time now.
Right, yeah.
It's a different switch. But conversely, so for me personally, I would disagree. I'm like, if I'm paying you on my payroll, I ask you to do these things, please do them. We'll talk about it. But if not, this is what I need you to do at work. But I would also draw the line that the boss doesn't have any right to then follow them in their private lives. If he wishes to go to every rally and kneel, God bless him, that's his right to do in his private life. And as a boss, I cannot talk about his private life. Unless, of course, it's some egregious thing where it breaks the law. Not because it's perceived in the wrong way. So we've brought our personal lives into work, and then we've allowed work to follow us in our personal lives.
Yeah.
As opposed to delineating them. When you're at work, man. This is what the boss wants you to do. Do you like it? Stay. You don't like it? You can leave, right? But also the boss does not have the power, or should not have the power, in my opinion, to follow you outside of your work and track your social media posts and see if you're still being, congruent with the philosophy of the company you work for.
Did they do that, the NFL?
Did they follow him outside of his
Yeah,
work? I don't think they had an issue, because it was all the hot topic was with him bringing it into work.
Right,
but
right.
people do get fired for things they do outside of work.
Correct, yeah,
that are
yeah.
unrelated to their work.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't think that's fair either.
Well, yeah, actually, just bring it back to the podcast thing again. I was telling you before this started that, there's some stories I would have about, my employer, but, I probably wouldn't say that it was that I wouldn't speak specifically about them or name them or anything, but it's like, I'm at least conscious of the fact that there could be backlash against something if it kind of got out, that I was, speaking in even a slightly bad way about something. But it's interesting how, I mean, I guess we've just as a society never really been in this position before. Like we've never had our private life so the ability to have it so scrutinized.
But see, if this is an unstoppable momentum, that the corporation you work for, you have fear that they may see something one day and then, pull you aside and say something to you. And then people who work for the government certainly feel like this. The only person that can really then have the freedom, and I'm lucky enough to have stumbled into this career path, I own my own business. And other than having maybe 30 people show up and protest me out in front, nobody can really do anything. I have such extreme independence, both at work and outside of work, because I own my own business.
Well,
should we not be encouraging a more independent business owners, because that actually encourages, therefore, more independent thought throughout society?
Yeah, oh, for sure. But I would say that wouldn't necessarily be true because, I'm thinking of that guy, the smokehouse guy who wanted to go against the mask mandates or whatever, and like
Jameson, was that James? I forget.
I can't remember his name, but like if you are vocal enough about something, or if you don't have the right position, or it's not obvious that you're standing by some principle that most people would want you to stand by, it'll affect your business. Like, I wonder how many people have, if you're,
Adamson barbecue, that's what it was called.
Oh, Adamson. Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, but he had a greater ceiling in which to maneuver there. Like, they literally had to bring horses to the front.
Why? And what is the deal with the horses? Like, so I was driving to work the other day and I saw this like cop on a horse, huge, up front, like, and just walking in the bike lane, like, and I'm driving, and it's like rush hour, and they're just kind of going not a trot. It would be like I don't know what a trot is, like a real slow, just walking. The horse is just like grazing almost, and it's and I'm like, what is the point of this? Like, there's no practical reason why they should be on a horse. Like, they're not going to catch more criminals. They've got the horses, like, shitting on the bike lane. The bikes can't get around them because it's like, so they have to go at his pace. And it's like, what benefit is this? And the horse doesn't like it. The horse is like, why am I not in a field? Like, why is this guy sitting on me? Like, so what is the reason for it?
I don't know. You can't be undercover on a horse either.
Oh, I know. SCTV.
Yeah, you remember that?
Right.
The undercover Mountie. Yeah. This, size and weight matters, and height. So it's got to be something to that. But yeah, it's a very archaic sort of way of handling things.
Yeah, like I get the whole like cavalry thing. Like, sure, like yeah, if it was a war, but it's like he's just patrolling downtown Toronto, and I don't know. It really just doesn't make any sense to me.
But bringing it back to Adams's barbecue, he had to push it quite far before they
brought in the horses,
where someone else could, like, just one or two tweets, let's say, and you've lost your job. So he had a greater room to maneuver in his own personal opinion than somebody who was, running for a corporation. Which brings me back to the topics of the day, lockdowns and whatnot, and how, it was this time last year that small businesses in Canada were still continuously closed since November, right? And Costco was open the whole time.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. It seemed ludicrous then, and even tenfold now that we know more. And certainly they knew the data back then. These people are very smart. They know the rate of infections and everything else. So you might have to wonder if all the new bills that are being passed federally, and one was just passed provincially in Ontario, Bill 100, if you look at the direction in which these bills are skewing, they're always about tightening control of what you can say online. And we could debate all the little nuances. The point is they're moving in a certain direction. It's more tightening, more restrictions, more censorship, less freedom, if you want to call it that, less room to maneuver. And part of that was also just how disproportionately small businesses were shut down while the big corporations were allowed to stay open. It's a virus. It spreads. It affects everyone. So I wonder sometimes, this may get a little conspiratorial, but is there a war against free speech? And is there a war against small business? Because small business allows you to have far more free speech than if you worked for a corporation. And it's just simply a restriction-ish movement in a direction that they just don't want society going in that way. And they may be playing a long game. I'm talking something that may happen slowly over a 100-year period. I did mention one day, I don't know if you saw this, about a year ago, Amazon is opening up hair salons in the UK. Amazon branded hair salons. Big business is getting into the business of small business.
Right.
Unbelievable. And I remember mentioning this to some clients, and a few of them were like, well, that's fantastic. Imagine they can buy the whole plaza and they'll have an Amazon cafe and an Amazon dry cleaners, Amazon, and then the pay rates might be better and they'll have HR departments. And I can see it from a simple algorithmic point of view, why that might be better for society, right?
Yeah.
But inevitably, though, it means you are working for someone else and you will have less independence.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Well, and it's just this consolidation of power. I mean,
Totally.
like how big can Amazon get? And I mean, we all want Jeff Bezos to have more money. I know that is definitely important to
Take
most
my
people,
money.
but
Yeah.
yeah. And you know, the funny thing is, like, I like Amazon. Like, I like AWS.
Sure.
I like the Amazon. The convenience of Amazon is great. Like, I couldn't say a bad thing about it. Like, even their return policy, but like, it's just always dangerous to have. Like, you need the independent.
This is the thing.
Thought.
Fragmentation is good.
Yeah.
And centralization, even if it adds more convenience, has to be dealt with very carefully, because that's a consolidation of so much power that if it were to ever turn negative, you would have very little recourse.
Right.
You know?
Which brings us back to Bitcoin.
And so all this virtue signaling, like the reason why we're here today, all this virtue signaling, it's for naught, because it's like ESG scores. Are you familiar with ESG scores?
Are they the social credit?
Yeah,
kind of thing?
yeah. So they're out there.
Oh yeah, the environment, social
governance.
Okay.
And it's just, not to go too long on it, but you have companies like Lockheed Martin who build missiles that kill people,
Right.
have a higher ESG score than Tesla, as if he's
Yeah.
going to launch cars onto people's heads or something.
Right.
Yeah, it's fake, right?
Yeah.
And it may sound good. It may sound good on the surface, but it's not backed up by anything substantive.
Well, I've also read that there is that is used as a weapon. Like, you can get. There's something similar to the ESG score, whereby certain groups that have very benign sounding names or positive sounding names will, but are actually fairly hard to distinguish between just well-funded lobbying groups in terms of the amount of money they have coming into them, and the pressure they can exert on companies and institutions to ensure that their practices are consistent with whatever the ideology is that they are that group is subscribing to. But I know Johns Hopkins, for example, got into some trouble with one of them after receiving excellent scores on their tally sheet in prior years. 1 year they had I forget the doctor's name. I think McHugh did a study with some colleagues on gender and sexual orientation. I didn't actually read the report, but from my understanding, it was a fairly fact-based, just following the science kind of report, and also fairly non-incendiary from my interpretation of what I've heard about it. But this report was sort of claimed as there was a claim that it was transphobic. So they one of these groups demanded that Johns Hopkins condemn the report as transphobic as well. And Johns Hopkins' position was, well, they were sort of, I think, playing, weren't necessarily standing by their doctor, but they were sort of not getting involved. And these kinds of things, it really is it's tough, because there may be some actual benefit to having groups that monitor these kinds of that companies don't go sort of run amok, but it really is a tightrope that you're walking, because they can also have an ideology which isn't necessarily consistent with science, or not consistent with even what the majority of people would consider reasonable. So it's
the codification of virtue.
Yeah, the codification of virtue.
And one thing totalitarian societies have always been good at is data recording.
Right.
They're immensely good at this. This is how they tried to control and centralize everything. So when you see the going back to Amazon, centralization, efficiencies, and now you even have people's virtues codified. You are centralizing all the data so you can become more efficient.
Yeah.
And I can see why a certain humans think like this to a degree, because like look at all the inefficiencies in the world, how much food goes to waste, how much electricity just gets thrown, we sell it at a loss, so we don't, because we overproduce. Like these inefficiencies are creating problems on the earth. And so when you try to the problem is when you try to organize the planet as one giant efficient Amazon warehouse, you're going to squish that which is why we exist in the first place, which is that independent thought, the new ideas, the innovations, and it will suffocate itself in the end.
Yeah.
A little bit of inefficiency, I think, breeds adaptiveness and creativity. Because someone's like, this doesn't work, we need a better way. And then you have 15 different companies trying to solve a problem rather than just one giant company, Now, I heard they're going to try to get around these, then what happens to be inefficiencies of centralized totalitarian states with, algorithms and whatnot, and just, let the computer decide, which it may work, but something just, every regime in human history promises like this time will be different.
Yeah.
And it never is.
So, what effect does the preponderance of virtue signaling have? Like, is this a really bad thing for society? Is this something we're going through? Is it a temporary phenomenon, or is it something that's really harming society?
Wow.
I guess it's a leading question. Well,
Yeah.
I guess, spoiler alert, it is.
Yeah. So for all the fakeness of it and hollowness of it, is this actually having a real effect? And then by default, is it actually hollow because it's having it? Yeah, that's a really tricky question. Yeah, I would say so, because it changes people's, it's so boring, but it comes back to people's politics, and it will change the way they vote. And,
Yeah.
you change the way people think, you change the way they vote, the way people vote, you get different leaders, different countries.
So, you wonder, so I guess I would say one of the, like a positive effect of it, at least, if we even start there, it's like, so let's take the Ukrainian, I support Ukraine, or whatever the tagline is.
Or I support the current thing.
Right. Yeah.
Whatever it is,
Yeah.
I'm in, because I'm one of those guys, and you better like me because I got a mortgage to pay.
Right. So, as you just said, it does influence policy. Like you have, governments are affected by this. If everybody has a Ukrainian flag, I support Ukraine, for good or for bad, like that will affect whether the American government is going to send weapons to Ukraine. I mean,
Yeah.
I assume it will. I guess I don't know that for sure, but
Look at what you just drew the line to. The virtue signaling can lead to whether a bullet lands on somebody's head or not.
yeah, but
That's
well,
quite-
I don't know that that's true.
It will send the ammunitions will get sent as a result of public pressure due to the mass virtue signaling campaigns, let's say, and therefore, that ends up in the hands of somebody who shoots somebody.
well, that is assuming though that the governments are the public pressure would be effective in doing that, and it's not just maybe they're making decisions on something else. Although it doesn't look that way, it does look like
or to be a little nefarious, the government cues the people to look like they want to be behind such a thing because the government themselves want to send the weapons to begin with.
Right.
Like,
right.
you really want this, don't you?
Yeah.
Wink, wink.
Well, it was like during World War II, like they, trying to get the weapons sent to Britain without, trying to aid Britain in the fight against the Nazis without actually entering the war. Like there was that whole dance. But yeah, I think that, potentially for something, depending on what you're talking about, like something like, overall the environmental movement. Like I know, Greta Thunberg is kind of a bit of a meme at this point, but like I think that there's something to be said for her, and I know that kind of is a lot. I think a lot of people have really vilified her, and I think there's a reason. I get it, like it's an oversimplification of everything, and it's kind of being used in many ways. But she's somebody who really did stand up, said what she was thinking, and was listened to by a lot of different people, and is now sort of an icon of the sort of nouveau environmentalism movement. It did promote awareness. Like I think that politicians are more afraid of casting the wrong policies because, this little girl is going to stand up and point their fingers at them and say, well, you said you were going to do this and you didn't do it.
It's, again, just to play devil's advocate, because I don't know much about her origin story, but was she involved? Like, who funded her to become that which she is? Like, who found this young talent, let's say, and brought them to the forefront? I'm sure there's thousands of kids that feel the same way. Why her?
I don't know. I think she, if I remember her story, it was she maybe said something to her teacher, or then she didn't get the right answer, so she went to like the local politician or something, and then just kind of the story got picked up.
I'm just suspicious. Anytime I say, it doesn't feel organic to me, and maybe it comes back again. Man, maybe we're just kind of stumbling into something today, but again, she's almost symbolically presented as the singular solution, or at least her way of thought towards the whole green problem. It kind of comes back to like mass psychosis to me. We have this young, wonderful, kind, emotionally charged, hyper literate young girl. If you open your mouth and say anything against her, you are a bad person.
Yeah, it's for sure politicized. But I would say that in terms of virtue signaling, this is an example of, because I don't think that I think that, I think that the problem with global warming and everything is much more complex than just we need to reduce greenhouse gases.
And you've actually reduced it to one single person. Like, listen to Greta.
Well, but I think that she was sort of the catalyst for like sort of a new urgency in this, like, well, and the IPCC reports, which are, spelling doom, but like, this has been something that's been going on for decades. There really hasn't been things have been moving along slowly, but we're now at a critical point we've known about this for.
But are we truly at a critical point?
Well,
I know we're getting to like the environmental stuff, but
according to the science, we are, Jim.
We've got 12 years for the last 20, 30, 40 years, there's some version of 8 to 12 years before things hit the fan. Mm-hmm. I'm not a climate skeptic. I'm just skeptical of the politics around such a mechanism. And so then when it just seems so well, like highly polished and almost, I don't want to say she's rehearsed, because I think her charm is her lack of feeling rehearsed.
Right.
But her image is so perfect, it makes me skeptical.
Yeah, I can see. Or is it just that's why she was the kid who was chosen by journalists or whatever amongst all the others? They're like, she was perfect, so it's like, let's focus on her.
Why even let her speak for a minute? I hate to sound like, because I love children. I
you seem to hate her.
If I had kids, I'd want them to speak and think just like her. But in the larger context of what's going on, like, this is something for scientists to sit down and argue about, as science should be, and debate all the things back and forth. And the reductionist of it is what seems overly simplified to me.
Well, I think that's the thing, though. The scientists have been debating this, and there's been papers written about it, and the IPCC reports its thing every 5 years or whatever it is, and it's just been getting progressively more dire, and nobody was really doing much about it. Like, there was there were overtures toward it, and people would make targets and this and that, and then they'd move the targets, and like, look, I'm not like Greta's biggest fan or anything. I'm just saying that, like, the fact that I do think that global warming is a problem, and we could even have a show debating that or whatever. Like, I don't claim to be an expert, but it's like, I've read the reports and I've read what some experts have said. I know that there's another side to that story too, and like, but it seems to me that there's a problem. Like, you can see it. I don't want to go down that whole. That's a whole show, and I've got to be prepared for it. So it's like
the virtue signaling of her it's almost like a Joan of Arc moment.
Yeah. Actually, I can see the Joan of Arc comparison.
That feels to me like such a well polished symbol for the world to get behind, that it's almost too perfect, and therefore I'm like, pause. What am I watching here?
Yeah, I think it's important to do that for everything.
If it's as presented, then that's phenomenal. Like, I think it's such a great thing. I'm just a little skeptical because it's just such a perfect, like I said, a Joan of Arc rallying cry of a young girl from Scandinavia, I believe, somewhere. She's got the cute accent, really literate, intensity, honesty, integrity when she speaks. Like, I don't have a bad thing to say about her as a person. Just her application, how it's been utilized for these means. I'm just If I was somebody that was pushing an agenda, it's certainly somebody I'd want on my side.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
how I
No,
look
that's
at it
fair
that way,
enough.
yeah.
But in terms of virtue signaling, and not to relegate what she's doing to just being empty, whatever. But you like to think that girls of that age, or kids of that age, are not extremely well informed about what's actually
Good
happening.
point.
So
She's
so to some extent that is a virtue signal, but it's but at the same time this is sort of in my opinion this is having a positive effect. It's an example of something where somebody is virtue signaling, but it is having a positive effect. Like the same thing with the Ukrainian flags. It's like you get that pressure. Maybe the government is making decisions based on that, and I don't know if even that's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe we should leave well enough alone there. But I don't know one way or the other. All I'm saying is, like, if the idea is you're showing support for a cause and it's influencing government action, then maybe that can have a positive effect. So, and then. I guess I was just trying to counter it because there's a lot of negative things about virtual signaling, but there is kind of a positive effect to some extent. I mean, it's very empty when you see people, just these like tweets that take like 2 seconds to send, popping in a picture of, I don't know, like. There's so many of them, and yet I can't think of a single one right now.
It can have a real effect, but there's just so much obvious, especially when there are people, personally fake virtue signaling.
Yeah.
On an everyday. And I have friends who are atheists,
right.
Militant atheists, diehard atheists. Just as Easter had just passed, they will openly mock Christianity on their Facebook page of like the Pillsbury Doughboy coming out of the cave going, "He has risen." And I laugh. It's funny. I can laugh at my own religion, no problem. There's plenty of problems, and I enjoy the complexity of the problems. But the same type of person will then post a picture of a Sikh in a really outrageously large turban, very ornate, because we're at an Indian restaurant, and they'll post this really cool photo. But this devout Sikh,
right, yeah.
And like really, you're just trying to use the word devout to show that you're not mocking the turban so much, but you really want the whole world to see how crazy the turban looks, because it's just like the grand poobah of all grand poobahs.
Yeah,
it's amazing, the turban. It's a beautiful ornate cultural thing. But the word devout is signifying that they're like, I don't want to get in trouble for this, because obviously the man knows what he believes in, and that's cool with me.
Yeah.
But you'll openly mock Christianity because that's kind of open season. You can do that these days.
Yeah.
You're fake. You're fake, and you're just doing that because you don't want to get fired from your job.
Yeah.
But you still want to have the room to mock.
Right.
So I guess to your point, I guess it's a mixed bag.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have some positive effects from virtuous behavior patterns, whether they're true. You got to admit, like, if you talk the talk, maybe you'll walk the walk. Mm-hmm. So if you keep talking about something virtuous, maybe eventually, if not you yourself, those around your children will do better.
But and this gets back to using this type of these people who are sort of could be accused of virtue signaling. Like the average one of these people don't really know what they're doing. Like they don't know what they're signaling about. Really, they don't really understand the issue. Yeah. So you have so what happens when you have a government or an industry or something use that tool? The tool being like, it's like using a botnet. You just have like a bunch
turn
of
us into robots.
Yeah,
you don't
yeah.
even know you're doing it. It's subconscious. It's like just the way we talk on a Sunday morning as I open my phone and have my breakfast. Of course, I will write this sort of thing. That's
right.
What will get me likes, and that'll make me feel better. And my boss, if they do see it, will feel good about me, and you don't even realize you're doing it. Mm-hmm. It just becomes routine part of your life.
Yeah.
That part's terrifying because it really, like you said about your friend earlier, it bypasses somebody's intelligence.
Yeah, yeah.
It's habitual.
Yeah, and you get somebody, some Oz behind the curtain that is decides that they want to use that large aggregate of people to push some agenda, because we're still in a democracy, and like votes are it's still like the majority of people that vote in a given riding or whatever, all is what gets people elected. So you steer that mass towards some target that you want either taken out or elevated, then you've effectively surpassed democracy or bypassed democracy.
Yeah, it does remind me to a large degree, like, is there some, like you said, Oz behind a curtain? Or sometimes I feel like it's a little more simple than that. It's very reminiscent of, remember when cars from the early 1900s, and they had the crank in the front, and they had to crank it a few times, but once they got the engine up and running, it was self-sustaining.
Right.
I feel like that's what it's like. You get a movement going, you kind of do your push. You could say now, like, for instance, well, of course, we update our passports every year, and we update our driver's licenses, and we'd have to make sure our vaccines are updated. It's just natural the way we live. No, it's not natural. We never did this before. What are you talking about?
Right.
But it just becomes the subconsciously normal way of behaving because you've done it long enough. It's habitual.
Right.
And they don't have to invest their time, money, or get caught out for creating something, let's call it fake, let's say, or unnecessary, because now it's just a self-sustaining mechanism. And then, the government contracts between pharmaceuticals and what continue forever and ever more, because it's just a new way of doing business.
Yeah.
So that part terrifies me, because, why do we pay income taxes? I don't know. My parents paid them. My grandparents paid them.
Right.
We just kind of pay them. It's just a self-sustaining mechanism at this point,
Yeah, those things kind of get like inserted somewhere along the way, and the government or whomever that inserts them almost has to bear the brunt of it for a few years, and then it just kind of passes into, like, for sure after the COVID pandemic, things are going to change.
It is a way of forming culture.
Yeah,
and maybe this is the key here. Like, maybe like virtue signaling is the initial seed that germinates into forming a whole new culture. And it just becomes organic at that point. I remember, like, I had lived in Greece for 10 years, and people used to say, well, we had our issues because we were underneath the Ottoman Empire for 400 years. So that's why we like passing envelopes of cash under the table, because that's how business was done. And just because the Ottoman Empire disappeared didn't mean the way we got used to doing business disappeared with it.
Right.
It's just the way we do things. Yeah, so, when you lose your culture, or your culture shifts, as we're saying, through, different virtue signaling turning into creating a whole new culture, it can set you on a trajectory that, it may take 1,000 years to shift it back. So this is the danger of virtue signaling, because you plant enough seeds, you may, just like a forest, veer off in a completely, like, a million different directions, of which you're not quite sure why you're even going there to begin with.
Yeah, you've lost track of the breadcrumbs as to how to find your way back.
How many times in here, like, how did the ancient Greeks do it? What about the Romans? Was it simply that they lost military battles and therefore collapsed, or did the culture within these cities shift into such a way that therefore they lost the battles and they just never came back?
Yeah,
and they've never regained, the presence they once had. So we have to be really careful with these things, because we think sometimes things come in cycles, but perhaps not. Once it's done, it's done. You had your moment.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and every great civilization falls. Maybe they fall for similar reasons. It's almost like a lassitude where, with Rome, it was like, well, Rome, I guess, couldn't handle all its empires, but, like, you get this sort of comfortableness. And, in the Western world right now, it's like we hit a level of comfort that it enabled us and emboldened us to start, picking all the small berries once again. And you're, all the big issues that are actually still out there got ignored, and we find ourselves obsessing and fetishizing over things that are, big picture, just not important or not as important. And, you just are amplifying those little kernels to be something that they're not. So
while spending money and time on that, the barbarians are amassing at the gate. We're so inward looking, thinking, what else can we do to be better? Oh man, we are so culturally civilized. So we thought, look at all the errors of our ways, and you start almost eating, like, atrophy onto yourself. And the barbarians are barbarians. They're full of, let's call it testosterone. They're on the gate and they're hungry, right? And so, have you ever heard of the theory? I believe I heard it first proposed by Camila Paliga. I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly. A professor in the States, second wave or earlier wave feminist I believe, lesbian professor. Fantastic, amazing. Yeah, you listen to her and you're just like, you'll be in awe. But she was the first I heard point out that if you look at the early statues of both ancient Greece and early Rome, the statues of the men were robust and strong and full of action and dynamism. And as you get to the later stages of each culture and you look at the male statues, they're a lot more metrosexual, a lot more effeminate. Like
Right.
things were progressing, let's say, and merging. And she's like, you can see it even in the art of the culture, that it's going into a direction that when the barbarians amass at the gate, do you have what it takes in order to keep your culture self-sustaining? And it just sort of eats on itself. And to bring it into modern terms, you might say that in our culture today, and some of the scandals around, Disney creating, what was it they said the last week? 50% of their characters going forward will be LGBTQ
Right.
sort of variations, which certainly 50% of the culture isn't that.
Mm-hmm.
Or Netflix had some TV shows that were obviously controversial too. I heard about that. People actually unsubscribed because they couldn't believe they were supporting
Right.
such stuff. So you do see it even today in our art. The controversy.
Yeah.
And it's hard to defend because obviously you do see issues as you get better at examining, empirically your own civilization, things that are wrong, and it's natural to want to fix things that are wrong. But in doing so, you might be taking away that which is good.
Just listened to Douglas Murray's new book. We were just talking about it before, but there's a part I haven't read. Well, the book's not out yet, but I will definitely be getting it. But he was kind of talking about it and touching on some stuff on a podcast, and he was saying how he talked about gratitude, and that's almost it could be the antidote for some of this stuff. Is like if people started experiencing gratitude for what they have rather than what they don't have, or sort of trying to pick apart all the problems with something. And it sounds trite, but it's he sort of illustrated it by envisaging a great painting, or like take a Last Supper or something like that, and you could look at that, or I think he did Michelangelo's David or something. So it's like you could talk about it's almost like the sort of postmodernists of today would look at something like that and think, okay, well, how much were the people paid that did this? Like, what does this mean? And what does this mean about, like, is he mocking, what does this mean about sexuality? What does this mean about, like, why is it a male? Like, there could be a million questions about why is he deifying or glorifying this sort of a white male figure as opposed to something else, or it wasn't maybe saying something personally about Michelangelo, like didn't he have slaves in his time or something? I don't know if he did or not, but they're like, those are the kind of things they're focusing on, rather of just marveling at the beauty of this thing. Like, you can always find something to pick about anything. You can pick apart anything. Like you look at all the cultures around us, and it's throwing rocks in glass houses. Like,
there's no perfect culture.
There's no perfect culture. And like, once you accept that and you just think to yourself, yeah, sort of warts and all, like there was definitely bad stuff in the past and there's bad stuff now too. But it's like, things are progressively getting better, and isn't like life is about, experiencing beauty and wonder and like, being happy, like, don't you want to marvel in the beauty of the now instead of focusing on all the things that we need to still repair, because you'll never get to the end of that.
It's very nihilist, and I wonder those who embrace this sort of philosophy earliest, the early adopters of it, just quite simply hate themselves, and they're projecting their own personal issues onto the society at large. I didn't succeed in life because of this, or I didn't succeed in life because of that, or I exceeded, or I feel guilty for my accomplishments and I got them because of this. Like it usually comes internal. I don't know, this might be some bizarre oversimplification, but the expression, you cut off the leg to save the body. But I feel like now we're killing the body because we feel guilty for the leg. Like
right.
Like that's not going to solve things.
Yeah.
And don't think by restarting from scratch you're going to build a better society. It's much better, I think, to take that which you have and just keep the good stuff and eliminate the bad stuff. But whilst eliminating the bad stuff, don't also destroy that which made you great to begin with.
Yeah, and I think it's important for societies to have like to be able to look back in the past and have heroes that they can identify with, and history that they can be proud of. Like,
And the ancient Greeks, sorry to cut, but they
yeah,
did it right. Like the heroes were flawed characters.
mm-hmm.
You had to go to Hercules and he had to do his 12 labors. But the other day, he's still Hercules. And those 12 labors were punishment for what he had done. I believe like murdering his wife and child or something like this, right?
Right.
And the gods were completely flawed. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like yet they were still gods and they were still heroes. You know, the complexity of what it meant to be a human is right there in front of our eyes. Yet we're looking for this almost puritanism, this pure, like everything must be pure these days.
Yeah.
You know, and if it's not, if you know, I love this artist's music, but my God, they've said a couple things and I just need not to burn every CD they've ever done because I just can't listen to it and disassociate it.
Right.
Well, if you went that through every architect, doctor, writer, there would be very little left on earth.
No, and not to make the obvious parallelism with fascism, but that sounds like what the Nazis did. You know, it's like somebody says a few things they didn't like, and it's like, let's erase their existence. You know what I mean?
In the name of cleanliness.
Right.
Right. Like they were trying to, in a sense, burn to cleanse that which was impure.
Yeah, and that was their whole thing, I believe, was just trying to create a sort of pure race and master race, and like,
how do you define pure? Like pure person, what, you want things that are not pure? Aren't you not a virtuous person? You know, purity is next to godliness. We are doing things the correct way.
Right.
But you can take something that sounds great and go to the extremes, and you know, it becomes the most horrific thing of all time.
Yeah.
And I really feel like some of the, you know, the diversity, inclusion, equity, equal opportunity is fantastic, but equal outcomes, they all sound wonderful on the surface, just like purity must have sounded well 75 years ago, but taken to their extremes, they will destroy society.
Yeah.
And that's where I think virtue signaling is being politicized and weaponized.
Well, you mentioned, you know, the DEI, diversity,
I prefer DIE.
DEI. Yeah, they made it so easy.
A little easier to remember.
Right. But, you know, this is being practiced in workplaces everywhere. In my own workplace, I have this going on as well. And there's a real, you know, when did the workplace become a place? Like, this isn't like human resources, you know, you can't say anything about, you know, you can't treat somebody bad. Like, I get that. Like, you want people to feel comfortable in the workplace. This is a whole agenda. You know, this is a whole
philosophy.
This is a department. You know what I mean? This is something where it's like there are meetings about this. Like, there's a whole committee about, you know, there are statements you need to say about land acknowledgements for Indigenous people. It's like, you know, this is a place of business, right? Like, I mean, I get the idea of wanting to sort of bring awareness to these things, and like companies trying to be progressive by being like, look, this is a good thing. We're letting everybody feel comfortable. But the truth is, people don't feel comfortable.
Helping the downtrodden, helping the black man, let's say, shouldn't include hurting the white man.
Right.
And I think everybody, including a black person, can agree with that. And if you were to take a national poll and ask them, do you truly believe in this sort of stuff? I'm more than willing to bet people don't. But it's ideology before hope, again, planting the seeds to create a new culture. Now, to play the antithesis part to that, because there is something we said, as I was saying earlier, if some of these cultures, indigenous, and I shouldn't say if, these cultures that had their culture, like these peoples that had their culture obliterated, let's say like the indigenous and black people from Africa, by including them as, you know, as 100% equals, which of course they should, but then in trying to create that, they're then creating them better than, perhaps you're trying to help them as a society rebuild that culture which they lost. And therefore, once they feel totally 100% included in everything and in every way, they can actually rebuild their cultures and become one with society as complete equals. Like, I can understand that point of view, but I just find it's a little like infantilism, because it's like, you guys, they're also adults and they could figure this out as well. It's 2022 and people come here as immigrants and refugees with far less and achieve in a shorter period of time far more. So if I ever got hired because of my skin color, I would be appalled.
Yeah, yeah.
I would be appalled. And I would say that and I say that as a child of, my father was an immigrant here who came at $17 and 17 years of age. If somebody had hired him because he was an immigrant who had, who looked different and had a different last name and religion, he would have been appalled. It's like, you better take me for me as a human being. So I don't find it actually empowering on an individual level and not on a population level, but I can understand why they think like that.
Yeah, I think that it's very, you know what? I think that there's some psychology behind it that just feels rotten. Like I've been in meetings where people will cry at them, and these aren't like this isn't like we're really getting into the weeds of like what happened with the Indigenous experience. This is just like having the land acknowledgement saying that, and like talking about just vaguely about oppressed people, and it triggers people to start crying. I mean, never mind how inappropriate that is for the workplace, but like why is it getting to that point for some people, who aren't even, by the way, of the group that they're talking about? Like we're talking about like people who are just relatively, privileged people anyway, who are like, are you that empathetic? Like, do you feel that much empathy for the problems of the world that you're going to cry about it every time it's brought up?
Controlling your emotions in the workplace is a admirable attribute. If somebody was going through a divorce at home, as personal, like one degree of separation, as opposed to several generations degrees of separation, and they were bringing their problems into the workplace, everybody would agree, don't do that.
Yeah.
Leave your problems at the door. When you come to work, now it's time to work. So, but now we're bringing in historical problems into the workplace of many degrees of separation. And everybody's kind of looking around going, what the fuck? This can't be the way we run businesses here.
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels fake. And I'll actually go deeper. I wonder, and this probably is controversial, but I wonder if these programs like diversity, inclusion, equity, and whatnot, is the impetus, the germination of that thought somewhere feels very similar to me as the type of person who supported that type of thinking today is similar to somebody that actually was so pure in thought, so pure in soul, as you're pointing, the person who's crying over something that happened hundreds of years ago, as that purity is the type of person who's like, well, we just can't have these Africans are just impure people. I only like purity. It can be utilized in different directions.
Right. So
that person who's so pious today about these sorts of things as you're talking about, diversity, inclusion, that piety is the same sort of used 200 years ago in an opposite direction that actually created segregation.
Yeah,
being pious, about their, instead of saying, what, the world's been a mess. It's always been a mess. This is my new black neighbor 200 years ago, and he does some things different from me, and I'm certainly do some things different from him, and I don't always agree with him. He doesn't always agree with me, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's messy, and it's okay. Today, as we looked for purity back then in a segregation form, we're looking for sort of purity today in a modern inclusionary form. And it's that extreme version of purity that scares the hell out of me. Because you have to just accept the world's a messy place, and that's all right.
Yeah, and for me, it really comes back to that thing about that mutual friend of ours with the leather jacket with no racism, no homophobia, no sexism, or whatever it was. I can't remember the third one. But it was like, this was like, it was like 5 or 6 years ago. So it's not, there's no courage needed for that. You're just parroting like what is every major corporation, every media outlet, every government is like openly saying.
It's like, it's like getting into grunge music in 1999.
Right.
Just too late to the party, man. And I love flannel.
Yeah, it's just it's like it's assumed that like who does think that racism is a good thing? You know what I mean? Who is really like? And it's not that I don't think that there. I know that there are. Like the way I look at it is we're all racist to some degree, right? So, but like
it's a messy place, the world.
Yeah. There's
all cultures look at the other with a little bit of, because when they don't have enough by other, I mean then someone who you haven't had a chance to interact with a lot. It can be skin color, it can be culture, it can be language, it can be geographic, it can be politics with skepticism. And then hopefully through time and interaction, all that gets taken care of.
Yeah, like they're trying. It's like, you know what? It really just seems like a marketing. It seems so disingenuous, these DEI meetings to me. And I've seen, you get the Coca-Cola "Be Less White," that whole thing, and what was the other one? A couple of.
What on earth does "be less white" mean?
I'll tell you what it means, sir. It means be less sure of yourself. There's a whole list of what. Do you know what I'm talking about? The "Be Less White."
Disempowering.
Oh, I know.
Now, I wouldn't encourage anyone to be more white. Just be who you are.
You know what? Let's just stop talking about white and black. Like everything.
100%.
Like what? Why are we having
the obsession thing? When someone sees race and everything, something in my mind tells me subconsciously they're racist. Because why are you even seeing such a thing?
Right.
Why does this even register on your radar?
Yeah.
And so that, again, that purity, the over piety today and the over piety 200 years ago, it's the same problem. Enjoy the mess, and enjoy people as they come to you, and take them one at a time.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things to do, and something that's almost harder and harder to do because you find less and less people to be able to do it with in a free way, is to have conversations that might be. In a public sphere might be uncomfortable, like about race, about like all these kind of sticking points today that are like trans issues, things like that. And I'll have them with a friend of mine who, I remember we had this whole conversation about during the George Floyd riots, like, what was happening there and trying to untangle that. And they really kind of got up on their soapbox about how, well, of course, reparations need to be made. Of course, there's like huge racism across. Like, look at what happened to George Floyd. Like, look at this. Look at that.
Actual payments.
Yeah, it was kind of alluded to. It wasn't like for sure that needs. I guess it wasn't for sure there needs to be reparation payments, but it was like something needs to be figured out. That kind of thing. But they kind of went on, and I was like, well, there were certain things I disagreed with, and I would say it, and then the response was, "Well, you're as a white man, I don't really think you have a right to say these kinds of things because you don't know. You live a privileged existence." And I'm like,
"Do they know if your father's black or not?"
Well, exactly. And then I was like, well, but no, I'm not an astronomer, but I can. When I wake up in the morning, I can feel pretty confident that the sun is going to come up. Or sort of a better analogy, I'm not a meteorologist, but. I can take a weather report from online and go outside and have a fairly decent idea about whether it's going to rain or not just by looking at the clouds and correlating that with the report and the radar and everything like that. It's
so anti-democratic.
Oh, it's exhausting. Yeah.
They're literally telling you, "Shut up.
Yeah.
Go sit in the corner. You know nothing. Don't open your mouth." That's what totalitarian regimes do.
Yeah,
if you can vote, you can have an opinion. And that's voting on who runs the entire country. So if you can vote on something like that, you can have an opinion on anything you want. Now, whether somebody listens to you or not, that's fine. That's what for people to decide. But who's to tell you can't have an opinion on something?
Like, I can't believe that we're talking about this. You know what I mean? It's like why are you saying that I can't have an opinion on something because of the color of my skin? Like, it's just like, I understand. It's like, okay, well, maybe.
But that type of thought is encouraged today. Unfortunately,
it is, and to some extent, like I get this is the tricky thing with a lot of this is like it's almost like the root of it makes there's some sort of meaning in the root of it of what they're taking, but they've abstracted it. So, like for example, like if I were up here and I was talking about like how difficult or how easy it is to climb a mountain, and that the Nepalese Sherpa is like, oh well, I could do that too, but blah 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 blah. It's like. You probably have to be a Sherpa to know how difficult that is, and like if I started talking about that as if I was an authority on the subject, then that's one thing. Mm-hmm. But I can look at a situation objectively and take what I've like statistics or like even anecdotal stories that I know from friends of mine or whatever, like, and then form an opinion and then express it. Like that should never be a thing that's censored.
You're not climbing a mountain. You're living in a city, and you're living in a city that's very multicultural. Toronto's been referred to many times as the most multicultural city on earth. So you have a lot of empirical evidence on a daily basis on what happens around you.
Right,
and it's not so abstract.
Yeah.
If you saw injustices in front of your eyes on a daily basis, you'd have a different opinion. you know?
Right.
So yeah, I understand the conceptually what you're saying. Well, I'm not a, why should I have an opinion on anything that's happening in Ukraine? I'm not Ukrainian, like
Yeah.
I don't know. And to a degree, yeah, you don't want to overstate your position on something perhaps until you learn more about it. But it doesn't mean you can't say what is right or wrong or what your morals are or what a potential generalized solution process may be.
Yeah.
Like, you know what? I just don't feel, seeing yourself as a victim ever helps.
Right.
In all
right.
scenarios. It's a very general way of being. Just like drinking water is good for you, so is not seeing yourself as a victim. So doesn't mean things didn't happen. Doesn't mean you weren't a victim.
And it doesn't mean that, like, the whole idea of victimhood is other people see you as a victim, right? Like what I mean is, if you see
So
somebody on the
disempowering.
street and you see, I remember this one guy used to, at Young in college, used to sit outside in a wheelchair and his legs were like amputated or whatever. Like and he had army fatigues on or whatever. I don't know if he was in the army or not, but like it was a striking image. So it's like, and he was panhandling, and it's like, your immediate thought is like, he's a victim, like something, I don't know, you want to give him money because you're like, well, I don't know what's happened to this guy, but that looks like a shitty life. Like so I can think of him like, yeah, he's a victim. Like, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean in in a compassionate way. I feel bad for him, and I want to help him because he obviously, like, I'm certainly, like, for all my faults, at least I have my legs, right? So like that is makes me, like, it should be the idea that somebody else finds that you're a victim. You should never identify yourself as a victim. Otherwise, I mean, just psychologically. Well, I guess that's a tricky
even
thing.
his own parents or himself would, at a certain point, like, well, buddy, you're going to have to get yourself out of this. Something bad happened to you. We're all going to work together to help you, and let's get empowered and move forward. It's the attitude, right? And yes, of course, obviously something substantive and like very, physical has happened to him that's noticeable from, a great distance away. But nevertheless, taking that victim mentality isn't going to help him very much.
Right.
Despite him being a victim. Like, so, go back to someone who was a Scottish shepherd 200 years ago and was barely, eking an existence out of the land, right? And then but they were white because they're Scottish.
Right.
And then they had the privilege of going to 2 world wars and drowning at sea in the last 100 years,
Right.
Are relatives of the family. Are they not victims?
Yeah.
Like, you literally can draw a line to a significant amount of damage to anybody in the world in the last 200 years.
Yeah.
It's getting out of that damage that matters. If we sit there and just simply focus on the damage, we're never going to get out of this.
Yeah, and in many cases, the damage has happened so long ago that it's, again, you sort of said it great right off the top of the small berries. Like, you're just getting your, like, magnifying glass out trying to find these berries, and it's like you're.
And if you look, you will find them.
Yeah,
That
there'll
they are
always
there.
be berries.
There are
Yeah.
problems everywhere, always. If you look at your own, after a facial, look at your skin, you will find issues with it. Despite having just done a wonderful procedure.
Yeah.
There's going to be problems everywhere, but the skill is to know what is a speed bump and what is an impenetrable brick wall.
Yeah.
And don't fret over the speed bumps too much. Everybody has speed bumps.
Right. It's interesting. You were saying that about the skin. And I was thinking of how, nature is so interesting. Like, I want to make sure I get this right. Is it a Mandelbrot, I think, did this? But like, it's this idea of like, how do you properly measure a coastline, for example? So like, you can measure the coastline of Canada and be like, okay, like, so if I said to you as a thing, like, I want you to give me an accurate measurement of the coastline of Canada, and you went in there with a ruler or whatever, obviously, like, sitting there with like your ruler from school, like, for 1,000 years,
30 centimeters at a time.
yeah. So, but if you go around, there's some way, and you'll come back and you'll be like, this is what it equals, and it's like, okay, and then what size ruler did you use? Because the deeper you go in, and the closer, like, the deeper the scale, the more little curves and little, like, crevices you're going to be finding. So then you need other rulers to measure those. And the truth is, the shoreline is infinite, because the amount of times you can keep drilling down and going around those small little curves. And I guess maybe technically it couldn't be infinite, but it's like when you're walking to the other side of the room, you just take a half step each time, right? You'll never get to the other side of the room. So like
half of a half still leaves more distance. Half
yeah,
of that
yeah,
half leaves
yeah.
more distance, and you just come,
So
until
we're
you're
like
at
pretty
that
close to the
atomic
other
level.
side of the room at this point in some of these issues,
And you say
and
it's good enough.
yeah, you know what? Let's move on to something where we're way back over there.
Well, and this consumes so much energy and time and mental power and money. And once again, as we're trying to decide the half of the half of the half, the barbarians are amassing at the gate.
Yeah.
You know,
And by barbarians, it's like we're not just talking about like there are issues. Yeah, metaphorically, there are issues that are grand issues, and like I'll bring up global warming, things like that. But like also asteroids, potential alien invasion. You never know. Like these are things that
biological.
Yeah.
Viruses. There's
Viruses.
There are things that can take down society that are far more important. We need to focus on those things.
Look at what's happening in Ukraine. Look at like a nuclear armed country is saying things like stop sending weapons or something really unpredictable is going to happen. I mean, like that. Here we are worrying about what the U.S. Army. It's like
you've just nailed it. This is exactly it. And as we sit here on our first world country lofty perch, thinking we have the privilege and time and expenditure to put into this sort of like problem solving within our own society, we don't realize and we don't see the greater issues that are surrounding our culture.
Yeah.
And the global culture.
Right.
We are completely because we're looking for the small berries, so much so that we're missing some of the new larger berries that are also growing.
Right.
You need to step back and look at the big picture.
So, another way that the virtue signaling is sort of a negative effect of it would be that there's certainly an oversimplification of the issue, and that's reinforced by social media, casting of villains. It's like the whole Trump effect, where the guy couldn't say anything without being ridiculed or without inflaming vitriol in the left. And he did say some ridiculous things, so it's hard to blame them for that. But there is a lot of it's very easy when you're virtue signaling. You're taking a complex issue, as we said before, and you're simplifying it and packaging it into this like tightly marketable, slogan, and then broadcasting it out to the world. And if you keep doing that over and over again, like there's some psychology behind this that says that like these people believe what they're saying. Like this isn't just like they're like people. Like the more often they're doing this, the more they're truly believing that this simplified narrative that they have is just true. So then you get into the situation where you have, if you're saying that Trump is a racist, and anybody who supports Donald Trump is a racist, and you're hearing that again and again, and you're broadcasting it out, and it's like this feedback loop, then why would you ever want to have a conversation with a Trump supporter? Like, you know what I mean? If you know somebody and you're like, well, this guy's a racist, then it's like very hard to even get started with that.
I was discussing this a couple of days ago, and I came up with just called it like it's like you're staining things, like the way like a skunk would stain something,
right?
And once it's got that smell of something you don't want to be associated with, whether the smell is emanating from that or not,
right?
It's just associated with this,
right?
It's radioactive.
Yeah,
you will not go anywhere near it. And once you stain something, it doesn't matter if the stain is true or not, because you're not going to be able to untangle that in this fast messaging type world where people need to sit down and listen to your nuanced answer. They are just going to categorize you and move on.
Yeah.
It's almost like people are becoming like algorithms themselves and quickly making really rushed decisions on good person, bad person, good thought, bad thought, and they're just chunking information and quickly moving forward with their life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very much like that. Like, and you see, well, technology plays such a big part in all of this. yeah, you sort of become the algorithms. And it's like you were saying before, like, and I think a lot of this kind of comes off like, back in my day when we did this, sort of old man ranting kind of stuff. But like, in the old days when you had a community or you didn't have like this like global forum to sort of voice your opinions in like the social media outlets of today, you would talk to your friends, you would talk to your family, you would talk to maybe there'd be people you would meet, you would travel and you'd meet other people or whatever, but you'd get a sort of you had that underpinning of respect, and you would usually listen to what people would have to say. And you might not agree with them or whatever, but there wouldn't be this like animosity which would extend to like wishing people dead. I mean, I've seen things. Every once in a while, Jordan Peterson will trend on Twitter, and I'll click on it, and it's like people just like devils, like saying like, I saw Jordan Peterson trending. I was hoping he was dead or something. It's like, Jesus Christ, like what is wrong with you people? You know what I mean? Like, do you and this is like, would you even say
he got COVID twice and he's still alive? WTF?
Yeah, it's like, what is the like, and it's really like, putting aside the fact that it's like you've obviously not listened to or read Jordan Peterson, if that's how strongly you feel about that, to any degree, other than maybe a soundbite or something like that. But setting that aside, even, it's like, you would never say that about even an enemy of yours. Like, it used to be like that was sort of verboten to say things like, to wish somebody ill, like even like somebody that you would be, maybe you were in a football game against somebody else, they're your arch rival or whatever. Like, you would never like wish anybody dead.
That's why
like
you shake hands at the end of a game.
Yeah, exactly.
And you
exactly.
learn these life lessons. That's why I think I'm a big fan of sport and team sport particularly, because you learn a lot of life lessons in there that will serve you and your community and your family and your loved one and yourself so well. But yeah, shaking hands. Imagine being in a combative sport for over 2 hours, and at the end you're like, that was great. Like,
yeah.
And to win something, for that win to have any meaning, it only has meaning if your opponent is actually worthy. Mm-hmm. So by virtue of winning, you're admitting your opponent is worthy.
Right.
Otherwise, what did you really win?
Well, by virtue of taking pleasure in the winning anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But if you just wanted to be like Nero and run the Olympics and like, look at me, I just won everything. And I'm amazing.
Yeah.
Like, it's appreciation of the combat and the battle. And to your point, then when you're discussing with family members and people you trust who have your best interest at heart, and have your best interest of your society and your family at heart, you're going to listen to their opposite point of view, and they're going to tell you their opposite point of view with a lot more care and love. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to get that level of conversation by being some anonymous little comment on Facebook.
Right, yeah.
It's really unfortunate. And it comes back to the town square thing, because again, if you are from the same geographically local location, everybody has a shared interest in their society doing well. And the society now is really hyper localized. So yeah, we have to work that out.
Yeah, no, it's a good idea about the town square. I can see how that would be something that would take off.
Little nodes in suburbs, and you just connect them. And then I have like dreams. Well, like imagine if each town square even had like a path network, so you could actually drive from one, or bicycle, let's say, from one town square to the next, and just oscillate through and see what's going on.
Yeah.
You don't need too many to get a nice sample size of where the general population is thinking, right? I think it's actually quite efficient.
Yeah, and we need connection. We need that connection with other people on a personal level, because I don't think that translates across cyberspace. Like something is really lost there. Like, you can have connections. Like, there's been, there's certain forums or whatever you might belong to, and you might have a kinship with somebody or whatever. And it's funny, as those develop, as your relationships develop more with people online, you might have more, you'd be more willing to accept some contrary opinion they might have. Like, it's harder to shut down somebody when you have a mutually built respect for them.
We should have a psychologist on at one time, at some time. And so it's just like, what are the attributes associated with chatting online versus the attributes of chatting face to face? And
like, what are the...
Yeah, like the warmth, the tone, the time for nuance, the geographic locations. Why do these things matter? The genders, the races. Like, how does this all interact and affect the level of conversation? And yes, you can get information from a text or a messaging board on a social media, but that information increasingly seems to me to be very one-dimensional. And if we're just having one-dimensional conversations, we're missing so much.
Yeah.
It might actually create, like, if we're doing too much of this, really tear society apart and ruin democracy. We need to get back to 3-hour debates between 3 political leaders with just 2 narrators and not taking questions from all around the country. So let's include everybody so they can all ask a question. No. We're going to have a couple really great moderators, and we're going to have a 3-hour nuanced conversation about complex issues face to face.
Do you know that, what is it called? There's something online that does this, and they have people come on and debate one another. Is it called EQ squared or something like that?
I don't know it.
Oh, it's pretty good. They'll just get 2 people to debate different sides of an issue. They had one with, I don't know if this was the same show. It was a show like this that had Eric Voorhees talking about Bitcoin, arguing against, I want to say, God, I can't remember. He's a big gold bug, like really proponent of gold, and doesn't like Bitcoin. So they had a great debate. Like, it was really interesting, and it's so refreshing to see that kind of long-term, like long-form kind of 2 people debating an issue. Like, you used to get this on like news. I remember watching these kinds of things on news shows where you'd get like some variant of that, like. But you just don't see it that much anymore, and but it's good to see it kind of coming out.
Even interviews, you have like Barbara Walters or Connie Chung sit there and just actually ask hard questions, and
right?
You have to actually answer back.
Yeah,
and this is going to take more than 3 minutes, and you're not going to be in some window tele-remoted in. You're actually sitting with 2 ferns and a chair, and facing face to face. And I'm going to ask you some difficult questions, and I want to know what you're all about.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of the reason we don't see that as much anymore is because of that, again, the whole public image thing, where it's like, one false move and you're in perpetuity going to be, ridiculed on the internet. Hopefully this is something we're going to evolve out of. But bringing back the virtual signaling, you're all even mentioning the genuine kind of, triumph you would feel out of winning a match against an equal opponent. That's being taken away too, right? Like, that's, you have the participation ribbons, and like we had that back in my day as well, where it was like, but you would get a winner, second place, third place, and then everybody else got a participation ribbon. So like literally showed up. Basically, that's what that meant.
But it did feel good at the time. I thought that everybody got a ribbon of some sort. I remember in grade 4 seeing this. It didn't come off as how old are you in grade 4? 10 years old?
Yeah.
Okay. Because you do feel almost like performance anxiety, and it can only be like, in class of 30, there's only 3 people that win something, everybody else sucks. Like, I did appreciate it, but there was a winner then.
Yeah, there was still somebody who was a winner. And it's important to have winners.
And participating is important. You showed up, you maybe just lost by a little bit. The variance between 3rd place and 9th was a fraction of a second.
Right.
Pretty good.
Fraction of a second. Wow, you had some pretty competitive schools there you went to.
Yeah. So I'm not totally against that, but I totally I really understand where you're going, because it's almost like politicians today, or even how our COVID response comes off of that a lot. It's like, well, we have to do something. So let's just have we'll all get a star for participating. So I'll be the person that comes up with the idea masking is a good idea. Even if there's no evidence behind it, it doesn't matter, because I did something to help out.
Yeah.
And I want my star.
Right.
And so those things can bleed into how we actually, integrate public policy, health policy during a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as opposed to, no, your idea is horrible. There's no science behind it. And thanks for showing up. Bye-bye.
Right, yeah.
It's a little harsher. So maybe, you can make an age limit on participatory ribbons. Up to grade 5, kids get that. After that, life gets a little more serious, kiddos. The whole, first 5 years of your life, your personality's formed,
Yeah.
There is something to be said about, turning 18 and going, well, that's what education was all about. Now this is the real world. Like bringing it back to Twitter and like free speech, let's say. It's like, well, why don't you just set an age limit on it, 18 and older, and have at it?
Mm-hmm.
You're adults. You should be able to discern what's true or not true. And if you don't know if it's not true, go do some research. We have given you the skills to learn how to do research.
Yeah.
And certain things you keep away from children. But we have this, again, it's like infantilism of the entire society these days,
Yeah. And, nothing is more patronizing than seeing like groups of people that sort of have had all the privileges in the world trying to speak on behalf of sort of underprivileged people as if they're their, torchbearers. And it's an infantilization. It's almost like, it reminds me of like, it's like they almost need something to do. They're bored or unhappy with their lives, so or their position, and it's like they need to have a project, and they kind of don't have the imagination to think of something better. So they're like taking on something that
and they're risk adverse.
Yeah,
because they're taking the trend of the day.
Again, we're not talking. Yeah, again, you're exactly like we're not talking about the this is the '60s and people are like, these aren't like avant-garde ideas. These are like, this has all been tested. Like Nike, like these massive corporations are all on your side. Like the government is on your side. Like this is nothing rebellious about saying no racism, no sexism these days. Like that's like good. Like that's the way we've already
get all the benefit and none of the risk.
Yeah, exactly. But because I love how a lot of these people, it's almost like you see sort of the what would you call them? Like the alternative kids of today. They have the hair, they have the piercings or whatever, but their message is basically the same message that's being trumpeted by every major news outlet and organization in the Western world. And it's like, that's cool. You can have those ideas. That's great. Like everybody sort of thinks the same way anyway, but this isn't rebellious. Like you're not being a rebel by trying to ferret out like the one racist idea that you might think has happened somewhere on the internet.
Yeah, it is interesting. You could draw ties to music or fashion and just things that were considered, frowned upon and alternative and underground, and somehow get sucked up into the mainstream and made into a profit-making machine.
Yeah.
Whether, like you said, music trends of the 90s, let's say. And it loses authenticity. And the original people that showed up there for the feminists, or the original people that showed up there for electronic music, who took the chances and wore the concert t-shirt that wasn't of the 10 popular bands of the time, those are cool people because they're used to actually sitting in a room full of masked people and saying, well, the law says I cannot wear a mask now, and I'm okay with that.
Right.
And so how different is that from being the goth kid in the corner when everyone's got blue jeans and a white t-shirt from the Gap?
Right.
You got used to being separate and other than because you believed in it and you stuck true to your principles. There's so many parallels. Youth and how it what happens in youth and how it turns into who you become when you get older. Maybe getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And we're creating a world today where you can never be left to be felt uncomfortable.
Right.
There's so much inclusion that you don't even know what it feels like to be excluded. And that might be missing a critical lesson in your life.
Yeah, I wonder if like you said, if we had a psychologist on here, might shed some light on this, but is that maybe doing damage? Like maybe there's some part of us that really needs that part of tribalism, right? Like it's part of like, you almost inherently want to be part of something and have to be against something else. But if we're all in one thing, then we lose that to some extent. Other than, if we can all say we're all human or whatever, but that's maybe doesn't quite satisfy that itch. So I wonder if there's some damage. I mean, I think it's great to be a world that, obviously, like, the goal is that everybody has like that equality of opportunity, but at least in the West, I feel like we've almost got there. And like, of course, I say that, and in my head when I say things like that, I almost can just hear like a bunch of random trolls on Twitter just letting out rage because it's like, well, there's this pocket that doesn't, there's this group that doesn't. It's like of course, get that there's like situations that, like, this is just generally speaking. But overall, like, we've made a lot of progress, and we've made. We were sort of on the right track, and now it's just getting so overly complicated where we want to like almost rewrite history, and it's like, we're taking away our attention from the stuff that really matters, and
and to your point, like, failure, bad, but controlled failure, amazing. Then know you can take a chance, and you have a family behind you, or social programs that will pick you up if you fall. So that you can actually take chances in life and actually try to be innovative, risk-taking. Because if we create a situation in which there is, for instance, it reminds me of to paraphrase Carl Jung, he said, I'm so grateful for the amount of failure I've had in my life, because it makes you a stronger person. Obviously not abject, completely catastrophic failure, but those failures are like lifting weights. They hurt at first, but you come out of it stronger.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to lift so much weight that you break your back or tear a ligament, but you need that pressure in life. Now, someone might say, well, Dimitri, you don't understand. You lived a privileged life. So many kids have had so much pressure, you just don't know it. Fair enough. People do have pressure, but we live in a pretty fair and equitable society. You'd be hard-pressed to find more inclusive and equal opportunity countries than those in the West.
Yeah, and I mean, without sort of completely doxing you, I would say that you've had your share of setbacks too, and you've fought back, right? Like,
well, I could give hours, and I talk with clients like this all the time at work. But like, what was it like having the life you did? And I was like, well, you could talk about all the traditionally wonderful things you might expect by living somewhere warmer and more exotic, and those are wonderful moments, and they are like meals you enjoy. You just kind of leave a smile on your face. But inevitably, that which sticks in my mind the most and added the greatest meaning were the difficult things. They changed you. They shook you up. They got you out of your box. They take you to places mentally that you would have never gone to on your own accord. Nobody wants to have difficulties, but when you have them, it shakes up your way of viewing the world. And now you're standing on a slightly different position on the mountain, and your view down the mountain has now been altered. That is growth. It's growth you didn't really wish on yourself, let's say, but you got it.
Yeah.
And now you see things potentially radically different. And it's just damn interesting. Like, why would you want to do the same thing, or have the same haircut your whole life, and wear the same shoes, and listen to the same bands? Like, keep growing and challenging yourself. And those challenges, those difficulties are the ones that add the most growth. When you're a young child, everything is new to you, and you're stumbling and falling and burning yourself on the kitchen stove, and you're growing. And at some point we get like adverse to all that. You shouldn't,
Yeah, that's, I think, probably one of the most fundamental aspects of being sort of an actualized human is, you mentioned earlier, adaptation, like the ability to adapt to your environment, and the growing. Like, you need growth, like almost beyond all things. Like, if you're not growing, then you're stagnant and you're dying. Like, it's
sometimes I envision that I have a spirit, whether it's real or not, who knows. And I say to myself, if my spirit begged for this one chance at life on Earth, what would it have asked for the most? Like, please let me be an organic being and have this human experience. Please, universe, let me become a human. What was the spirit looking for? And it's not going to be comfort. It's not going to be palm trees and dolphins. It's going to be, I'm starting with a certain preconception, and I want during these 100 years, hopefully, to end up at a different place and almost discover what I am and who I am. And you can only do that in maybe a physical vessel. That's what I feel like sometimes. So the whole arch of my life has been about, obviously being kind and loving and supporting everyone around you. But part of that is take that chance and kind of just go out there and be like a little USB stick in touch with tentacles, everything out there, hurt yourself, burn yourself, live those moments, take risks, calculated risks, but definitely take risks, and sit back and analyze what the hell you just felt and how it changed, how you have changed through that experience.
Right.
Right. This is the organic world. So you have to get out there and be willing to experience all the pros and the cons. Otherwise, you're just in your prison cell of convenience where you're well fed like a zoo animal.
Yeah.
You know, freedom is dangerous. It's risky. You're going to be outside of the zoo. You have to fend for yourself. You have to look for your own food. But inevitably, that animal will have a more meaningful life, I think, or as a human animal, than that which is coddled in a well-padded cell and fed. So you just have to, you have to take those chances in life and grow from it. And so with this virtue signaling, if it's not real virtue, if you're not really willing to put something on the line, to risk, to be called out, to be the other, then you're simply just following trends. And you're living in your well-coddled cage of ideological glow that will help make you not feel outed or something.
Is there a way that, I mean, the trend seems to be that the amount of virtue signaling is increasing and the amount of sort of genuine activism or participation is decreasing. Would you, like, what would be, is there an antidote to that? Is there something we can do differently? I mean, you had the town square idea, which I think sounds like a fabulous idea. Is there something else that may be more immediate that?
I think the royal family do this in England, where they send their kids away off for that one gap year. You know, it's just, go to Chile and go build houses in some poor community, and you know what? Look at those people in the eyes, and put that nail in the piece of wood with them, and realize, oh crap, I showed up 15 minutes late, and this guy's actually on time every single day. He's better than me, and I just simply live a better life from damn luck.
Yeah.
You know, holy fuck. There's humans all over the earth with ultimate capacity, and they're not getting their opportunities. You're going to come back and be so humbled and full of humility. So I would recommend, if I had children, to I know life is expensive, but try to take a year off, or you can do it in segments, 4 months here, 4 months there, and just go out there and explore the world, live that. And at that age, you don't need 5-star hotels. You're happy in a hostel and a cell phone and a pack of cigarettes and sunglasses, and you're good to go. And that's how you should be at that age. And go and organically experience as much of the world as you can. And if you can't leave your country, because that certainly is a form of privilege as well, then you know what? Take 4 months off and go work at a soup kitchen. Is that what they're called? Compass. All these Scott Mission, one of these.
Right.
And just look at those people in the eyes and help them out daily. And don't do it for the volunteering hours. I need this for a resume. Do it for yourself.
Yeah. Right.
I want to feel this.
Yeah.
I know that you get to come home to a nice bed on a lofty, green cul-de-sac somewhere. And just go out there and live a bit. Step away maybe from formalized education for a bit. Mm-hmm. Like one of the things I loved about people like Steve Jobs or Pierre Trudeau was that, Steve Jobs had a full life before becoming a tech guru. And, guru is part of what he is. Like he saw the holistic arc of what he was trying to create, something that those of an engineering mindset simply would never see in 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. They're just looking at it from an engineering, a linear kind of plane. There's something to that. Or one of my favorite images, when I would see Pierre Trudeau take his kids, the Prime Minister of Canada, would take his kids around the world, which was a far more exotic place at the time because travel was not as abundant as it is today, but he knew to take them elsewhere. And you see his children standing in front of the Acropolis in the mid-'70s.
Yeah.
You want to see where democracy started? Let's walk on the steps where these people were.
Yeah.
I am a prime minister of a democratic country. Let's go see where democracy started, guys. It's thrilling. It's going to change your world perception forever.
Well, as you did mention, though, that is a little, like, that is privilege to some degree to 100%. Be able to do stuff like that.
Try to do it locally if you can't do it. But just get out there and be with more people, and of all shapes, size, colors, religions, all of them. Just whatever you can do.
Yeah.
My father at 15 told me, I was taller than him at that age and probably about the same height as I am today. And he's like, I'm not going to have a son that is, this tall, spend another summer at home. Go get a part-time job. And he wanted it to be a humbling job.
That's such a, exactly what I would think a Greek father would say.
Yeah. You're not going to spend all this time in the basement, Yeah. It was fantastic. And I used to say to myself, it was one of those fast food jobs, McDonald's in the 80s, where, it was very busy inside of McDonald's. But I used to say to myself, even then, I had the presence of mind, well, I'm starting at the bottom. And that's good, because everything I do from this point forward is only going to be upwards. Mm-hmm. So it was a healthy recognition. And, I grew up in a very nice neighborhood. And some of these kids would come in, and I'd have to serve them on Saturday night, 11:30, my own peers. And they're out with their friends and girlfriends and whatnot. And you had to just suck it up. I'm doing the night shift tonight.
Yeah.
And it just got you over that. And a lot of them, their parents wouldn't want them to work such a job because it was beneath them, let's say. And what kid really wants to do that job? That's the job of the parents to inject some wisdom into the thing, right? And my father, I give him credit, he had the presence of mind to say that. No, you need to go be humbled, and there's nothing wrong with doing an honest day's work. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to be some grandiose thing, but those trips also that are abroad, there are programs out there that make them much more cost effective. Too. As long as you get yourself on an airplane and get there, they're just happy for the free labor. Yeah. So to bring it back, where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, hopefully COVID restrictions or some other pandemic don't affect somebody's ability to do that. But yeah, no, it sounds like a great plan.
It's a wonderful world, and it's full of shit. And you just got to get out there and just... In every good place, there's 10 things bad, but that's okay. Just go out there and be part of it. Go into that taxi cab and, you know what, the guy ripped me off today. That sucks. And just experience what that feels like. Yeah. To be on the other side of a transaction that doesn't go in your favor.
Right. Yeah, and try not to get ripped off tomorrow,
Exactly. Or deeper, understand why that person behaves in that way. What happened culturally that allowed that to happen. And then you take that lesson back to where you're from and try to make sure it doesn't happen in your place where you grew up.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic. So be brave. Don't coddle yourself. Failure is amazing. Embrace it full-heartedly. This fear of failure and that it's a negative thing is probably one of the most foolish things we've ever invented.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. And thank you for listening today.
Thanks, guys.
That's it.
We had a good time.
Bye.